This is my dad's story from about 35 years ago. I'll tell this from his perspective, exactly as it was told to me. I grew up on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, and when I was younger, my friends and I went camping pretty often. It was something we could do together, drink and have fun being underage. When I was about 18, my friends and I decided one weekend to go camping near a lake called Small Fry. It's not too far from Portland itself, but far enough to get away. It was a pretty last-minute plan, so we didn't bring much other than some blankets and a case of beer my older brother had bought for us. After school on Friday, we headed out. Once we got there, we found a cleared-out area that we could easily park our car in. At first, we made a small fire and drank a few beers, but we quickly got bored and decided we would go out for a midnight swim. The area we parked in wasn't near an actual trail to the lake, but it was only about a half-mile away. We knew what direction to go in. My 3 friends and I were pretty buzzed, as we were somewhat lightweights at that age. We decided to head out into the forest, toward where the lake was. This was back in the 80s, so we didn't have cell phones with maps on them to double-check we were going in the right direction. We trudged through the forest, completely sure we were going the right way. I think it was about 15 minutes since we'd left the campsite, when suddenly the air around us seemed to change. It was a warm summer night, and it was probably around 70 degrees, but as we kept walking further, it felt like it was getting colder and colder. Suddenly, I felt all the hairs on my body stick straight up, and the 4 of us all quickly turned around and ran back towards the campsite. We didn't talk. Not even a single word was muttered to each other about turning back around. I never ran that fast in my life. As bad as it sounds, my mindset in that moment was that I couldn't be the slowest, as I didn't want it to be my life in danger that night. I can't exactly explain why, but in that exact moment we were all in that fight or flight mode, and we decided to run for our lives. I remember feeling as if there was a presence behind me, not even a person maybe, but just something that wanted to harm us. We bolted back to the car quickly and unlocked it. We all hopped in and drove straight home. We left the fire burning at the campsite, and all the clothes and blankets we brought with us were left as well. The car ride home was completely silent. We got back to my house, and my friends hopped in their cars and left. We never talked about that night since. A few weeks later, it was finally summer. My family went on yearly camping trips with a few other families that were close to us. One night, as a group of about 20 of us were sitting by the fire, telling stories and just talking about life in general, someone from one of the other families brought up a weird hiking story they'd recently experienced. He explained that he and his wife, along with a few of their friends, had decided to go hiking on a Saturday. When they arrived, they were surprised to see that no one else was out there. It was a known hiking spot, so they figured that it would be pretty busy on a Saturday. The group of them hiked up the trail, and they soon got to the top of a cliff that overlooked a lake. When they got to the top, he felt as if he had no voice. The group of them quickly turned around and began to hike back down, walking much faster than normal. They didn't talk at all, just apparently decided they didn't want to stay, not even taking in the view. They had brought lunches with them and all talked about taking some pictures too, but instead they all hurried down the trail, not talking to each other at all. They all just had this gut feeling that they had to get out of there. None of them spoke to each other on the way home, and no one brought it up since. I asked where this incident took place, never mentioning I'd had a similar experience. The man said it all took place on Small Fry Lake. Honestly, that scared the crap out of me, as I just had that same experience. I didn't want to say anything though, as my parents were visibly concerned. I didn't want them trying to tell me I couldn't go camping in that area again. Maybe it's not the scariest story, but I'm curious to know if anyone else has been to that area and had a similar experience. When I was talking to that man and his wife, they both said they had this gut feeling that they were living the last few seconds of their lives. The man said he even started to see his life flashing before his eyes as he hurried back down the hill. I don't know what's going on at that lake and what made us all feel that way, but there's definitely something not right about that place. I've never believed in the supernatural, so I don't know if there's another explanation or something. All I know is I'll never be going back up there ever again. When I was early in my 20s, I moved to Southern California with my aunt. Once I had a job established and a steady income, I found an apartment that was really affordable at $350 a month plus utilities. That's the first red flag, really, because California is not cheap. The other residents in the apartment were a 45-year-old male named Zach and a 45-year-old woman named Tina. They weren't a couple, and Tina was a little difficult to deal with, but this story is really about Zach and his friend Mike. Mike and Zach were childhood friends, and Mike lived in the same apartment complex as us. He was over a lot because of this. Every time I would come home from work, they would be polishing off a handle of vodka, then would go out. I didn't really think much of this, other than, damn, these guys really can put it away. I wasn't really comfortable in this living situation, but it was cheap and I was in school. I just tried to make the best of it. I got along well with Zach for the most part, if it was just him around. Mike was just a time bomb, though. Here are just a few instances of the behavior that gradually got worse over time. The first incident, Zach invited me out with Mike and another friend of theirs out to a local bar. It was a couple of miles away, and I was comfortable being around Zach. I got into the passenger side of his truck. I didn't have any negative interactions with anyone until this point. Mike just suddenly went ballistic in our complex parking lot about how I was selfish and had no business being in the front seat because I wasn't Zach's girlfriend. It was quite strange, to say the least. Here was a man the same age as my father throwing a tantrum over not getting the passenger seat. I just got out and went back to my apartment. My first rent check bounced, and I apologized to Zach. I discovered that my checks had misprinted the account number and paid in cash. I paid off the bounce check fee as well. I thought that was all okay, until I got home one evening and Mike was over as normal. He started interrogating me on why I couldn't pay my rent. I was only 22 at the time and didn't really want an issue. I simply said, hey, I apologized and took care of it. Even though Mike didn't live in the apartment, he just would not let this go. He would just scream at me, saying I was lazy and I should be evicted immediately. The iPhone 6 and 6 Plus came out around this time, and Mike got that phone model. He told me he would let me look at it if I went down on him. It was uncomfortable and awkward. I mean, what do you even say to something like that? Especially when this guy is always trying to scream and yell at you. We weren't friends and we never really had a single good interaction together, so I just kind of did finger guns and went, "You got me." I ran off to my room. It's important to note that Mike and Zach both had 2 DUIs. Zach was a school teacher and ended up being let go because of them. However, both men continued to drink excessively, all the time. I had to have a key made for the lock on my bedroom door because it would get violent a lot, and that was my only safety net. A lot of other instances continued to happen, but this one takes the cake really. Zach and Mike had gone out and taken an Uber to whatever local bar. I'd gotten home and went straight to my room as always. I heard the front door swing open, and Mike was mad drunk, screaming his head off about how he'd lost his new iPhone. The guy started beating on my bedroom door, demanding to be let in because he knew I had his phone on me. I cracked open my door. He stepped away with his fist balled up, like he was going to punch me in the face. I told him I didn't have his phone. Mike circled back again to the fact that my rent check had bounced the first time, and obviously I needed to steal for the money. He demanded he come into my room and tear it apart, looking for the stolen phone. Of course, I told him absolutely not, and shut and locked the door in his face. Mike started banging on my door trying to unlock it, threatening to kill me and saying he was going to rear me and I would get what I deserved for being a thief. Lots of other gross and scary things. I was told if I called the police, he would beat me to a bloody pulp. This was especially scary to me because my aunt was my only family nearby, and she wasn't really helpful at all. She just told me to be an adult and deal with it. Other than that, I didn't really have a support system. I told Zach a couple of days later I would be moving out immediately and would not be paying the rent for that month. Out of Zach's dark bedroom, Mike popped out with this creepy, sinister smile, saying bye in an almost taunting voice. I hurried into my room and locked my door. I could hear Zach blaming Mike for me moving out, and Mike just continued to call me names and ask how I had the money to move. The iPhone was found in the end for anyone who's curious. It had fallen out of his pocket in the Uber he was in, but obviously the first step to finding his iPhone was to flip out on me for no reason versus calling the Uber driver. This was almost a decade ago. I don't know what happened to that dysfunctional pair, but I wish them nothing but the worst. I live alone in a somewhat busy neighborhood. This happened about a year ago. It was winter time, and I live in a climate that typically gets a lot of snow. Not only was there already some snow on the ground, but it was also very cold. One night I was at home by myself when it started to snow. It was going quite a lot as well. I had heard about a large snowstorm that was supposed to impact the area, so I had no intentions of going anywhere anytime soon. Luckily for me, I was working at home for the next several days. Pretty soon, the snow really started to come down. I looked out my window occasionally, only to see more and more snow each time. It was a very heavy downfall, and soon it was nighttime. I was really glad I didn't have to go anywhere in weather like this. Occasionally, a snowplow would drive down my street. But other than that, it was completely quiet. At probably around 7 p.m., there was a sudden knock at my front door. I found this to be pretty odd. I went over and looked out the window, only to see a young woman standing outside. I didn't see a car or anything else, so I didn't know where she could have come from. At my house, from my front windows, I don't have a very good view of the street or even my driveway. I didn't know who she was, and she wasn't dressed for the weather either. She just had pants and a sweatshirt on, and appeared to be in her early 20s. I opened the door and asked her what she was doing out in weather like this. The woman asked me if she could come inside my house to warm up. Her story was that her ex-boyfriend had kicked her out of his car, then drove off or something like that. I asked her if there was anybody that could come and pick her up or something. She said she'd just called her mom and she was going to arrive soon. I didn't really like the idea of someone I knew nothing about entering my home. For some reason, I felt like it was a bad idea. I did feel bad for her with it being a snowstorm and everything though, so I allowed her to come inside in the end. I told her she could wait right inside the doorway. When you enter the front door of my house, it's kind of between the living room and the dining room. The front door is on the left side of the home, the living room is on the right, and the dining room is straight ahead. After the woman entered, she made a beeline, walking straight into the dining room. I was really confused, but I didn't say anything. I just watched her. She said something quietly, something like, "I'm sorry." 1 second later, she'd walked all the way to the back of the house and was going out of my sight. I started to move closer to her to see what she was doing. As soon as I looked around the corner, I saw her again. She was at the back door of my house, opening it up. My first thought was wondering why she was going back outside if she'd wanted to come in so badly. But that thought was interrupted when I saw the door open and 2 men suddenly walked right inside. I couldn't believe it. At that point, my instincts just kicked in. I instantly turned and ran the opposite direction. I ran towards my hallway, where my bedroom and bathroom were. I heard multiple footsteps coming after me, but they were still a ways back. After I got inside my bathroom, I closed the door and locked it. Seconds later, somebody was trying to open the door. There were multiple people outside my bathroom now. Nobody was saying anything though, including me. After the door wouldn't open, there were several loud bangs on it. I got out my phone to call the police, but I didn't feel safe staying in the bathroom. Right after dialing 911, before I had the chance to speak to the operator or anything, I tried opening my window as quickly as I could. I probably did it in record time. I jumped out my bathroom window and landed in a bush outside that was covered in snow. I then ran through the deep snow in my yard and fell several times trying to run away. I made it back to my feet quickly though, and eventually got around my house into the street. I just kept running until I made it as far away from my house as I could. Then I was finally able to talk with the 911 operator. I said everything that happened, and after that I walked down my street, far away, and waited until the police arrived. I didn't have a coat on or anything, but the craziest part is that I wasn't even cold at all. My adrenaline was going far too hard. When the police got there, the woman and the 2 men had already taken off. I got back to my house to find it a complete mess. There was stuff all over the floor, and a few things were stolen as well. It could have been much worse though. They didn't go in every room. They probably realized that after I got away, they would have a limited time before the police got there. I feel very lucky I made it out safely. I'm not sure what those people would have done if I had stayed. Would they have tried to hurt me? I hope not, but I'll never have to know. Since that happened, I don't answer my door to anybody I don't already know. I've also installed a Ring doorbell, which would have been nice to have at the time of the incident. I'm hoping nothing like that ever happens again. I'm a stalker. I can't say this anywhere but online anonymously. I'm a stalker and this is my story. She was coming home from work. I first caught a glimpse of her gorgeous face on the train, amongst the other commuters. Her hair was long, in a ponytail, and she had an oval face. She was so beautiful. When she got off the train, I found myself following. She left the train station and walked through a shopping center, then out onto the streets right up to her apartment. After following her for a number of days, I figured out she lived on the 2nd floor in the 7th room, all alone. She never seemed to have noticed me. Every night she stopped off at the local convenience store and picked up a bottle of tea and some bread. Before I knew it, I found myself a stalker. I guess I knew I had a problem, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. I didn't want to do it, and I knew it was wrong, but I kept following her like this for about a month. I didn't want to do anything to her, never wanted to interact with her or touch her. I just found something so fascinating about watching her routine. She got off at the same time every night, went exactly the same route home, and I was always 1 minute behind her. I don't know what my endgame scenario was really. I guess I just liked the routine of watching her do her thing. I remember I followed her one night to her apartment and checked the time every night. I figured out she would come out her front door at 8:25 exactly. I would whisper good night every night before heading home. It was routine and there was something comforting about it. One night after I said my goodnight and turned around to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I didn't really pay any attention. I just went on my way home. When I started to notice the footsteps were following me in whatever direction I took, I decided to stop outside a local convenience store to take a look behind me. I was interested to see who it would be following me. I saw the figure of a woman walking toward me. It was her. She didn't regard me with a flicker of recognition. This is probably because she'd never noticed me. She probably didn't even know I existed. I was sure she was heading to the convenience store to buy something, so I headed back to the station. I had been following her routine for about a month now, so I was quite surprised by her decision to do something different that she'd never done before. I got on my train and rode it for about 30 minutes until I got to my stop. As I began walking through the dark streets, though, I heard a familiar sound behind me. Footsteps. I unlocked my door and entered my apartment, then locked it behind me again. I peeked out the window, and there she was, staring at me from just outside my door. The same thing happened the day after. I followed her to her apartment, and she did the same U-turn and followed me to mine. I had no idea what happened that caused this change in her. She decided to stalk me too. But for what reason? The more I thought about this sudden change, the less interested I was in following her routine. I started to get a bit frightened, honestly. I decided to quit following her. The next day, I got off my train and headed towards my apartment. It sounded so strange to just go home without wishing her a good night. I began to hear the familiar sound of footfalls behind me. Since that night, she followed me home every night after. At some point, she also began trying to get into my room every night. I would slowly hear the turning doorknob. At some point, she even began trying to break in as well. I'm pretty scared, no lie. I lay in bed whispering sometimes that I'm sorry I stalked her again and again, but she just won't go away. I work for a company that sells bulk products out of a small warehouse. Sometimes the products we get in are pretty expensive, so I was hired as a security guard. During the late hours of the day and most of the night, I'd be working in that small warehouse. There's not too much need to walk around the place all night, though. I spend most of my time in the office, looking at a bunch of live camera feeds. During my first 3 years of working there, I'd never had one single incident. No people ever came by at strange hours, no attempted break-ins, nothing at all. In all honesty, it made for a pretty boring job, and left me mostly unaware every night, even though it was basically my entire job to be aware. On this night in particular, I pulled into the small parking lot and parked by the front door. It was right next to the car of the only other worker that was still there. When I got inside, I let him know that I'd arrived, and he left shortly after. I checked all the doors and made sure all the systems were working properly, then sat back at the office and stared at the screens. My attention span died out after about half an hour, and I pulled my phone out to do some stuff. I still made sure to check on the cameras every 20 seconds or so, but every glance back at the screen showed no differences at all. Just a couple of minutes before 1 a.m. though, the system made a beep sound I'd only ever heard during the initial tests I'd do at the beginning of my shifts to make sure it's working. So this was the first time I'd actually had something come up. After a quick look at the alert, it was a motion detection of a person walking by the building. It took a few tries to find the right camera, but I did note that on the back side of the building, a man was walking right on the edge of where the parking lot met the grass. He had a thick hoodie on and was too far to see exactly what he looked like. The direction he was walking in wasn't really anywhere though. I mean, that's why I'd never gotten alerts before. because our building is way too far out of the way for anyone to ever have a reason to walk or drive by it. I observed the man go down to the end of the parking lot, switching cameras to keep track of him. Then suddenly, he stopped for just a moment and looked back toward the building. He turned his head back and forth, looking across the whole side, then started to walk on the pavement toward the side of the building. Immediately, it went from just an odd experience to something I might have to report on. The man walked along the side looking at every door he came across, but not trying anything. He would just kind of look around, then immediately move on. Once he got to the corner, he went around to the front and then went right up to the main door. I watched from the cameras as he knocked on the door and heard it echo from inside the building. I got up from my chair and opened the office door, slowly peeking down the hallway. I could see the man standing behind the entrance doors. I don't think he could see me through the glare on the glass, so I just stood in the doorway and watched him. For a moment, he was trying to look through and continued to knock on the door again. I went back into the office and pressed on the speaker button that allowed me to talk to people outside. "This is a private location. You need to leave right now." I watched on the cameras as the man looked up at the speaker. He looked like he was going to say something, but then he frowned and returned to knocking on the door again. It was in this moment that something just gave me an intensely eerie feeling, some sort of gut reaction to this man's strange behavior. I looked closer and noticed he was keeping one hand in his pocket at all times. Maybe this man was far more dangerous than I'd initially thought. I contacted the police through our security line, getting instant connection with them and explaining the situation. I walked back into the hallway and looked down it while I talked to the dispatcher. That's when the man pulled something out of his pocket and slammed it against the door. I couldn't see what it was, but from the way it impacted and the sound it made, I knew it was some kind of metal object. He was trying to break open the glass. I rushed back into the office, hearing several more hits as I locked the heavy door behind me. I quickly looked back at the cameras, but by then the man had given up and was running away from the building. In only a few seconds, he was completely out of sight of any of the cameras. It was as I waited for the police to arrive that I replayed the footage of when the man hit the door. I could see pretty clearly that he was holding a gun and slamming the handle against the glass. We got a full report on it, but so far, even with some decent footage of the man, he hasn't been identified. We don't know what he was intending to do once he got inside. He made it obvious after hearing my voice that he didn't care I was there, but from the partial crack forming in the door, he was likely only a few hits away from shattering it, and then I would have been forced to find out the man's true intention. This is a true story, and there's proof if you decide to look it up. Anyway, let's begin. This story is about a mass murder that happened on Halloween in 2020, Quebec City in Canada. It's a very violent and graphic story, so you've been warned in advance. I'm a man, and at the time this story takes place, I was 20 years old. It was a wonderful Halloween in 2020 in Quebec. A lot of children were dressed up, people laughing, lots of happiness, everyone was having fun. It's really the only time we had some happiness and fun in that whole stupid period. Later in the evening, when it was getting really dark, a lot of people were outside. I was near the Chateau Frontenac with my dog, walking and enjoying the moment. At some point, I noticed a man wearing a cool costume. His costume was as a samurai, and he had a katana in his hand, a realistic-looking one too. I remarked to him that I thought it was a cool costume. He walked near me and gave me a look, then looked my dog over, then back at me. He told me I had a cute dog, and I replied with a simple thank you. He walked on his way, but it was quite weird. I could just feel in those few seconds that something was off. Well, about 10 minutes later, right when I was about to walk home, I was still near the same area. At some point, I heard someone yelling and crying that someone had stabbed a man with a katana. Immediately, chills began going through my body. I saw some people running, and everyone was panicking. As you can imagine, I was panicking too. Even my dog was on edge. I grabbed up my dog and we started to take off and run. As if the timing couldn't have been any more perfect, I began to hear the sounds of police sirens and see flashing lights. I was scared. I was absolutely terrified I'd run into the man again. I ran with my dog to the nearest stairwell. Now, I live all the way down the road. In Quebec, we have an up city and a down city. I was at the up city, and I actually live in the down city. We have stairs to go up and down. I went to the nearest stairs. While I was running, I saw a man sitting down with a paramedic. He had blood flowing all over his arm. It was a clean cut from a katana. As I got near the stairs, I saw another man covered with blood. He was still alive. He was also with the paramedic. There was a cop nearby too, so I was obliged to go down the road without the stairs. There were a lot of cop cars that were soaring by, and everything was so loud. I was almost home with my dog when I saw 5 cops in alert and offensive mode. They began yelling at me to get back inside. There was a maniac out on the loose. I replied that I was sorry and I lived nearby. I was just trying to get home. The police urged me to hurry up and get somewhere safe. I could understand their rushed and aggravated attitudes. I didn't take it personally. Everyone was in panic mode. As I continued onward, I finally made it home. But that's when I saw something that still traumatized me to this day. I saw one of my neighbors lying on the ground in front of her door. Right next to her was her husband. He was crying his eyes out, going hysterical. Her face was drenched in blood because her head had been half sliced open. It was a terrifying sight. I was traumatized. Later that night, the story was all over the news. They were telling all the locals to keep their doors and windows locked and secured, and that the killer was still on the loose. They didn't know if he was acting alone, or if there were others also involved. Stay inside and don't go outside for any reason, at least until there was an update of the man being caught. A few hours later, he was eventually apprehended and arrested. In total, he injured 5 people and killed 2 with his katana. I really hope the 2 victims can rest in peace, and I hope this sick fuck rots away for the rest of his life in prison. The thing that really gets to me, though, is what if I didn't have my dog with me? Did he really give me a pass only because I had a cute dog? If I didn't have my dog that night, would I have been added to his list of victims? That thought gives me the chills to this very day. One thing I hate almost more than anything in this world is being waited on. I don't mean at restaurants or places like that. I mean in life in general. I've always been pretty independent, and when I first met my now husband, we didn't exactly click right away. We would literally fight over who was going to pay for the check. Fast forward to now, and we have a nice balance of things going. One thing that I usually do is take care of the house, specifically the kitchen. I cannot stand a messy kitchen and dishes in the sink. He's infamous for leaving dishes there, so that's why I take care of the kitchen when I can. Now, a few weeks ago, I had to have surgery on my knee. This past summer, I destroyed it playing softball and continued to finish the game, doing even more damage to my knee in the process. I put the surgery off for as long as I could, but the pain was just too much. It wasn't even the procedure I was anxious about, really. I actually wanted to just get it done and out of the way. I was more anxious that I was going to be bedridden for a long while. My husband is amazing, and I knew he'd take care of me, but I also knew the kitchen was going to be a mess. I'm sure this makes me sound pretty controlling, but I don't even care. I just loved making sure everything's clean. The day came, the surgery passed, and I was in bed. I was stuck. I hated it. For me, it felt like I was trapped in a cell. I was told not to move for several days, unless it was for the bathroom, and even then I should have assistance. Luckily, we had a bathroom in our bedroom, so it was only a few hops away in case I needed to go. The first night I stayed in bed, and the next day I stayed at home. I was already getting restless. I hopped to the bathroom, and when I was done, I realized I was actually getting around pretty well. When my husband left for work, he begged for me to just stay in bed and said he would take care of everything when he got home. All I could think about was that the kitchen was a mess. It didn't take me long to convince myself that it would be perfectly fine to make my way there for a little while and just do the dishes real quick. I took my time on the stairs because I'll admit it was not an easy task. When I got to the bottom, I smelled something strange though. Not trash or old food that I was half expecting to smell coming from the kitchen. What I smelled was what I thought at first was some cheap cologne. I knew my husband didn't wear that though. The smell hit me harder as I took a few more steps. It wasn't cologne. What I was smelling was some sort of Axe body spray or something. I knew it right away. When I was in middle school, all the teenage boys would spray themselves with it after gym class. I'll never forget that horrible smell. I took a few more hops. I know I should have grabbed my walker, but the smell was so strong. I felt like I could almost taste it. I knew it wasn't from my husband. I would have easily smelled it on him before. I went to text him. Hey, don't get mad, but I hobbled my way downstairs. Why does it smell like Axe body spray down here? After I sent it, I went into the kitchen. I'll be honest, I was surprised there wasn't a mess at all. There was a small plate and fork in the sink, but other than that, he was doing a good job at keeping the kitchen in line. I went over and washed the last couple things in the sink when I noticed the back door was open. It was slightly ajar, cracked more than actually open, but it still wasn't shut all the way. Maybe this isn't that big of a deal for some people, but me and my husband rarely ever use that door. When we go out back, we usually just go out the side door. We keep that door locked at all times and put the recycling bin in front of it. I hobbled over to investigate some more. I noticed the bin outside had been moved a few inches as well. It was like the door had been opened from the outside, and the bin slid out of the way just enough to let someone in. I knew already the answer, but I texted my husband again anyway. Hey, did you open the back door for any reason? He didn't respond right away. I hopped back into the living room and sat down on the couch, trying to put all the pieces together and put a rational spin on everything. The thought of someone breaking in didn't even remotely cross my mind. We lived in a really nice neighborhood with almost no crime. My husband called me back a few minutes later and told me he called the police as a precaution to make sure nobody had broken in. He also said that he was heading home from work early. I got off the phone with him and sat there quietly, waiting for the police and my husband to show up. Without warning, a bang came from the closet door in the living room. It shot open, and a tall man dressed in all black ran out of the closet and out the back door. As soon as he ran by, the smell of Axe was incredibly overwhelming. I tried hopping to the window, but I was only able to get a brief glance of the man as he ran by the side of the house. I noticed he had a very thick beard, but that was pretty much it. He was out of my sight in seconds. Not long after, the police showed up, and my husband right after that. I gave them all the information I could, but like I said, I didn't really have much to give. The most disturbing part of all of this is that the cops said there were no signs of a break-in into the house, At least no signs he forced himself in. That led the police to believe that whoever this intruder was, he may have had a key to the house. My husband went out right away and bought new locks for all the doors and made sure all the windows were locked as well. No other neighbors reported anything suspicious, which makes it even more likely this person targeted our house specifically. He also did not even attempt to steal anything, which begs the question, what the hell did he want? If he wasn't swimming in Axe body spray and hadn't left that door cracked open, whatever it is he wanted, he may have gotten it.